The smell of burnt metal and desperation hung in the recycled air like a bad joke, and Kessler was getting tired of hearing it. He stood at the edge of the viewing platform, staring out into the scrapyard that stretched as far as the eye could see, assuming, that is, one had an eye for rusted-out hulks and shattered dreams. "Welcome to paradise," he muttered, though the only thing welcoming about it was the way it seemed to swallow hope whole. Behind him, a cacophony of grinding metal and clanging tools provided the soundtrack to their lives. The crew, his crew, bounced between tasks with the kind of resigned determination that only came from knowing you didn't have any other choice. The lot of them had been stuck out here on the fringes of known space for too long, scrabbling together a living by picking clean the bones of dead ships. "Hey, Kessler," called out a voice, dripping with enough sarcasm to drown in. It was Lenny, the closest thing they had to an engineer, though calling him that was a bit like calling a rat a chef just because it knows its way around a trash heap. "You gonna help us with this hunk of junk, or you just gonna stand there thinking about how pretty the stars are?" Kessler turned, gave Lenny a look that could have cut through hull plating. "I'm supervising," he said, deadpan. "Supervising my ass," Lenny shot back, wiping greasy hands on his jumpsuit. "If you're the brains of this operation, we're all screwed." "Glad to see you haven't lost your optimism," Kessler replied, stepping down into the fray. He loved this crew, God help him. Each one of them was a cocktail of quirks and misadventures, shaken and stirred into something that occasionally resembled functional. There was Trix, the only woman on the crew who could drink him under the table and still be ready to shoot the legs off a fly at 50 paces come morning. She was elbow-deep in the guts of an old freighter they'd hauled in, muttering curses that would have made a space pirate blush. "What's the status, Trix?" Kessler asked, leaning in to get a look. She glanced up, smirked. "Status? Oh, you mean our latest pile of regrets. It's deader than disco. Unless you've got a miracle tucked in your back pocket, this thing's not flying anywhere except maybe straight to hell." "Great," Kessler sighed. "Another payday on the way of my last marriage." "At least this wreck didn't take half your credits on the way out," Trix noted. They salvaged what they could, piece by miserable piece, until something caught Kessler's eye, a glint of something unusual under the debris. "What the hell's that?" he murmured. "What's what?" Lenny replied, peering over. Kessler dug into the mess, his hands finding something smooth and metallic. He pulled it free with a grunt, and the crew gathered around, eyes wide with the kind of curiosity that usually got cats killed. It was a sphere about the size of a grapefruit, with faint etchings crawling across its surface like alien hieroglyphs. It was heavy, heavier than anything that size had any right to be, and cold even through his gloves. "Well, isn't this my lucky day?" Kessler breathed, turning it over in his hands. "Anyone got a clue what this is?" "Looks expensive," Lenny offered. "Could be our ticket off this floating junkyard. Or our one-way trip to oblivion," Trix added. Remember what happened to the last crew that found something shiny? Kessler did remember. Everyone did. Space is littered with tales of crews who got greedy, reached for more than their share, and ended up as another cautionary tale. But this thing, it was different somehow. Important. "Maybe it's just a really fancy paperweight," Lenny suggested, though no one was convinced. "Whatever it is," Kessler said, "it might mean we're not as screwed as we thought, or more screwed depending on how you look at it." He took it to the lab, a corner of their ship that was more wishful thinking than actual science. The Aegis, as they would come to know it, sat on the table, inscrutable and silent. It was like having a tiger on a leash. Sure, it's impressive, but there's always the chance it'll eat your face off. The data terminals whirred, and the crew watched as the scanners attempted to make sense of the thing. It was Lenny who finally broke the tension. "So, we keeping it or tossing it out the airlock? Depends," Kessler said. "You feeling lucky, punk?" "With our luck," Trix snorted. "I'd rather face a pissed-off Martian." But her eyes lingered on the device, curiosity getting the better of her. The scanner finally chimed, and the readout spat out a series of numbers and symbols that made Kessler's head spin. "Well, that's enlightening," he muttered. It's a weapon, Lenny said, the realization dawning on him like an unwanted sunrise. No shit, Kessler replied, squinting at the display. The kind of weapon that makes planets flinch and governments sweat. You thinking what I'm thinking? Trix asked. That we're in way over our heads, bingo. There was a pause, the kind that hangs in the air like a bad smell. The kind of pause you fill with laughter or whiskey, or both if you've got good company. So, Kessler said, trying to sound more confident than he felt. What do we do with a galactic superweapon sitting in our lap? Lenny shrugged. We could sell it, retire somewhere warm where people don't shoot at you for fun. Or, Trix suggested, her tone as dry as the deserts of Mars, we could keep it, wait for the inevitable shitstorm to roll our way and see if it can blow us up from the inside out. Tough call, Kessler said, weighing their options. But hey, at least it's not boring. They spent the next few hours trying to decipher the Aegis, each theory wilder than the last. Was it a deterrent, a relic from some ancient war, or just a really effective doorstop? None of them knew, which was both thrilling and terrifying. As they debated, Kessler couldn't shake the feeling that they'd stumbled onto something bigger than themselves. The kind of find that changes destinies, usually for the worse. We'll need to contact someone, Lenny said eventually, breaking the uneasy silence. Someone who knows more about this kind of thing than we do. And who might that be? Kessler asked. Hell if I know, Lenny admitted. But I'd start with someone who's not afraid of a little danger. That narrows it down to every idiot in the galaxy, Trix pointed out. Exactly, Kessler said, a grin forming despite himself. And we're the biggest idiots of them all. The decision made, the crew set about preparing to leave the scrapyard, a place that had been both home and prison. As they powered up the ship, Kessler took one last look at the Aegis, still sitting there like a ticking time bomb. Whatever happens, he told the crew, it's been a hell of a ride. And if we die, at least we'll die interesting, Trix said with a wry smile. Here's hoping, Lenny added, fingers crossed behind his back. Kessler chuckled, feeling a strange sense of calm as they broke free of the scrapyard's gravitational pull. They might be flying into the unknown, with a galactic superweapon tucked away in their cargo hold, but they were doing it together. And in the grand scheme of things, maybe that was enough. The ship drifted into the void, leaving behind the twisted wreckage of dead dreams and broken promises. Ahead lay uncertainty, danger, and the kind of adventure they'd only ever dreamed about in their most reckless moments. So, Kessler said, settling into his seat. Who's up for changing the course of history? Trix laughed, a sound that echoed through the cockpit like a battle cry. Let's just try not to blow ourselves up first, okay? As the stars stretched out before them, the crew of the Rust Bucket hurtled towards destiny, propelled by equal parts stupidity and bravado. And really, in a universe where the odds were always stacked against you, what more could you ask for? Kessler paced the narrow confines of the ship's lab, the Aegis glaring at him from the table like a coiled snake ready to strike. This is a bad idea, he muttered, half to himself and half to the universe that had clearly made a wrong turn somewhere. We should just throw it back into the scrapyard and pretend we never saw it. Too late for that, Lenny said, hunched over a terminal that looked like it had seen better days, about 50 years ago. This thing's got more layers than a bureaucrat's excuse. Yeah, well, unlike a bureaucrat, it might actually work, Trix chimed in, peering over her shoulder at the display, or kill us all. It's a toss-up, Kessler sighed, which was becoming something of a hobby. Can't believe we're betting our lives on something we don't even understand. We've bet our lives on less, Lenny pointed out, like that time we tried to outrun a pirate cruiser with half a fuel tank and a prayer. True, Kessler conceded, but at least that was our choice. This thing might make the decision for us, ready to fire it up. Lenny asked, a grin plastered on his face that was equal parts excitement and madness. What's the worst that could happen? That, Trix said, pointing to the screen that had just erupted in a blaze of red warnings. Looks like it just woke up on the wrong side of whatever hell it came from. Kessler felt his stomach drop. The Aegis had activated, its etchings glowing like the eyes of a demon roused from slumber. "Did you touch something?" he accused, though he knew full well nobody had dared lay a finger on it. "Nope," Lenny replied, hands raised in mock innocence. "It decided to join the party all on its own." "Wonderful," Kessler said dryly. "We've got a self-starting, high-tech doomsday device. Next it'll be making us coffee, more like serving us our asses on a silver platter," Trix remarked, watching as the holographic display began to show a map of the galaxy. Except it wasn't just any map. It was zooming in, focusing on one particular blue-green marble among the stars. Earth. Kessler's voice cracked like a rusted hinge. The Aegis had locked onto their home planet, the cradle of humanity, and was charging up in a way that suggested it had more destructive intentions than a teenager with a new gaming console. "Well, shit," Lenny said, as the realization sank in. "Guess we know what kind of weapon it is now." "Yeah, the let's vaporize the birthplace of your species kind," Trix said. She leaned closer to the screen, eyes narrowed. "We need to stop it. Like now." "Great plan," Kessler said, frantically pressing buttons that seemed to do nothing but mock him with their inaction. "Got any idea how, working on that part?" Lenny said through gritted teeth, fingers flying over the terminal. "Just keep the panic to a minimum, all right." Kessler nodded, though his heart was pounding a marching beat in his chest. "No pressure, but if we screw this up, we're going to be the most hated people in history. Assuming there's anyone left to hate us," Trix added, ever the optimist. The ship's systems began to wail, a cacophony of alarms that made Kessler feel like he was trapped inside a particularly aggressive marching band. The Aegis was powering up, the readings climbing higher and higher until they were well into the we're-so-screwed territory. "Any luck?" Kessler asked, hoping for a miracle and expecting disaster. "Define luck," Lenny shot back, eyes glued to the data streaming past too fast to comprehend. "We need to abort whatever the hell it's doing," Trix insisted, her voice cutting through the chaos like a knife. "Is there a self-destruct button on this thing?" "Not that I can see," Lenny said, sounding more frustrated by the second. "But give it time. Maybe it'll blow up on its own." "Let's assume it won't," Kessler said, forcing himself to take a deep breath. "Can we redirect it? Point it at something less Earth-shaped." "Working on it," Lenny muttered, fingers dancing over the controls like a pianist at a particularly twisted recital. The alarms continued to blare, and Kessler felt the weight of the universe pressing down on him. Somewhere out there, rival factions were probably licking their lips at the prospect of a weapon like this. And here they were, three spacers with more grit than brains, trying to keep it from turning Earth into a charred memory. "Got it," Lenny shouted suddenly, his voice a beacon of hope in the sea of panic. "I've rerouted the power. It's gonna take a bit, but it should stop charging." Kessler let out a breath he didn't know he'd been holding. "And the targeting, working on that too," Lenny replied, sweat beading on his forehead. "It's like trying to convince a stubborn mule to move." Kessler glanced at Trix, who was working on a backup plan, because with their luck, having only one plan was asking for trouble. "How's it going over there?" "Not great," Trix admitted, plugging cables into ports that looked like they'd been designed by someone with a grudge against logic. "But I've got a few tricks up my sleeve." "Let's hope they're good ones," Kessler said, turning his attention back to the Aegis, which was now glowing with an ominous light. The galaxy's most dangerous light show, and they had front-row seats. Time seemed to crawl, each second stretching into eternity as they worked feverishly to keep the Aegis from doing what it was clearly designed to do, which was, of course, to make everyone on Earth very, very dead. "Okay, I think I've got it," Lenny announced, sounding more uncertain than Kessler would have liked. "I've overridden the targeting. It's not pointed at Earth anymore." "Where's it pointed now?" Kessler asked, his curiosity getting the better of him. Nowhere," Lenny said quickly, which Kessler took to mean somewhere, "but I'm not telling." "All right," Kessler said, not entirely trusting but having little choice. "Now what?" "Now we figure out what to do with it," Trix said, leaning back with a sigh. "And maybe find a way to keep every two-bit warlord from coming after us for it." Ah, the easy part, Kessler said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. The three of them stood there for a moment, the gravity of their predicament settling in like an unwelcome guest. The Aegis was still humming, its power down but not out, a sleeping giant waiting for someone to poke it again. So Lenny said, breaking the silence, do we call someone or bury it in the deepest hole we can find? Who'd we call? Kessler asked. Hey, we accidentally found a planet killer. Want to help us put it back in the box? Yeah, that'll go over well, Trix said, rolling her eyes. Next thing we know, we're on the run from every trigger-happy faction in the sector. Figures, Kessler said, rubbing his temples. We finally find something big, and it's the one thing that could make us public enemy number one, or heroes, depending on how you spin it, Lenny said, ever the optimist. Only if we don't screw up, Trix pointed out. And we still need to figure out how to get this thing off our ship without blowing us up. It's always something, isn't it? Kessler said, feeling the weight of the future pressing down on him like a freight train. Welcome to life on the edge, Lenny replied, a ghost of a smile on his lips. They all knew the score. They were in deep, deeper than they'd ever been, but if there was one thing they were good at, it was surviving against the odds. And if that meant taking on the galaxy with a smile and a loaded weapon, then so be it. So, what's the plan? Trix asked, her expression one of grim determination. First, we figure out how to keep this thing quiet, Kessler said. Then we find someone who can help us get rid of it. Any ideas? Lenny asked. Not yet, Kessler replied. But one thing's for sure, we're not going down without a fight. And with that, the crew of the Rustbucket set to work, preparing for the storm that was surely coming. Because in a universe that thrived on chaos and greed, they were the only ones with the will and the stupidity to try and make things right, even if it killed them. The rusting hulk of the Rustbucket creaked and groaned around them like an elderly dog getting up from a nap. Kessler stood in the cramped confines of the ship's lab, trying to ignore the persistent droning of alarms. The Aegis, their unwanted guest, sat sulking in the corner, its runes glowing like a neon sign advertising doom. All right, folks, Kessler said, gathering Lenny and Trix for an impromptu strategy meeting. We've got a planet killer with its finger on the trigger, and I think it's time we stop playing cosmic Russian roulette. Could be worse, Lenny said, looking far too cheerful for someone standing next to a potential apocalypse. Could be a Monday. Trix rolled her eyes. Every day out here is a Monday, genius. And unless we get this thing under control, we're going to be as popular as a fart in an airlock. And speaking of unpleasant surprises, Kessler added, we might have a rat aboard. Lenny's eyebrows shot up. You mean like the rodent kind, or the backstabbing, sell us out for a credit kind, Kessler clarified, his voice taut with tension. He could feel the walls closing in, the ship's metal hull like a prison cell. Someone's trying to cash in on the Aegis. Great, Trix said dryly, because what we really needed was a betrayal subplot. Any suspects? Not yet, Kessler admitted, running a hand through his hair. But whoever it is, they've got to be stopped before they turn us over to the first warlord with deep pockets. Nothing like an inside job to keep things interesting, Lenny quipped, trying to lighten the mood. So, boss, what's the plan? Kessler sighed, a sound that seemed to echo with the weight of the universe's disdain. First, we need to keep the Aegis from going off. Lenny, you keep working on the terminal. Trix, see if you can track down our mystery saboteur. And you? Trix asked, crossing her arms. I'll be doing my best to keep this ship in one piece and figure out how to stop a countdown that's already ticking, Kessler replied, feeling the pressure like a vise around his chest. Lenny nodded, already at the terminal, fingers flying over the keys. I've got an idea. It's going to take some time, but I think I can reroute the countdown. How much time? Kessler asked, hoping the answer wouldn't be more than we've got. Depends, Lenny said, shrugging. If we're lucky, a couple of hours. If not, well, let's not think about that. Right, Kessler said, refusing to entertain the notion of failure. Trix, keep an eye out for anything suspicious. Whoever this traitor is, they've got to slip up eventually. Got it, Trix replied, already moving towards the door. If anyone looks shadier than usual, I'll be on them like grease on a mechanic. With their task set, the crew dispersed, leaving Kessler alone with the metal behemoth that was the Aegis. It was a silent, ominous presence, like a giant cat watching a mouse with lazy interest. No matter how much Kessler wanted to toss it out the airlock and forget this whole mess, he knew that wasn't an option. "Let's see what you've got," Kessler muttered to the Aegis as if it could answer back. He approached it cautiously, his mind racing through the scant information they had. The thing was ancient, older than anyone could guess, and brimming with technology that made their heads spin. He tapped a few buttons on the small control panel they'd managed to decipher. The holographic display flickered to life, showing a countdown that was ticking away like a death clock. Numbers descended in a silent scream of urgency, and Kessler felt a chill run down his spine. They were running out of time. "Come on, Kessler," he whispered to himself, trying to focus. "You've gotten out of tighter scrapes than this." Meanwhile, Trix prowled the ship's narrow corridors, eyes sharp for signs of treachery. The rust bucket wasn't exactly bustling with crew, but that just made it harder to hide when someone was up to no good. There were only so many places to skulk about unnoticed. Her mind spun through the possibilities. Who would be desperate or greedy enough to sell them out? Everyone was on edge, but that was nothing new. Life on the fringes of known space was a constant dance with desperation. But this was different. As she rounded a corner, she caught a glimpse of a figure disappearing through a hatch. Trix narrowed her eyes and followed, her footsteps silent. The trader, if that's who it was, seemed to be heading towards the cargo bay. The air in the bay was stale, the smell of machine oil and old metal heavy in the air. Trix slipped inside, moving between crates and stacks of spare parts. Her eyes scanned the dimly lit space, catching a flicker of movement. There, she saw someone hunched over a terminal in the corner, fingers moving with furtive precision. Trix crept closer, her heart pounding with adrenaline. She had to get a look at who it was, had to catch them in the act. A sudden clatter echoed through the bay as her foot caught on a loose bolt and the figure spun around. Trix froze, caught between fight and flight. "Damn it, Trix!" The voice was familiar, exasperated. "You trying to give me a heart attack, Lenny?" Trix stepped out of the shadows, relief mixed with suspicion. "What the hell are you doing down here?" "Same thing you are," Lenny replied, rubbing the back of his neck. "Looking for whoever's trying to sell us out. Thought I saw someone sneaking around." Trix eyed him, her instincts prickling. "And you didn't think to mention it?" "Didn't want to jump to conclusions," Lenny said, raising his hands in a placating gesture. "You know how it is. Accuse the wrong person and we've got a mutiny on our hands." She considered this, her eyes narrowing. Lenny had a point, but that didn't make him any less suspicious. The fact that he was here alone with access to another terminal, well, it didn't sit right. "All right," Trix said slowly, keeping her skepticism in check. "But if you see anything, you tell me. We can't afford any more surprises." Yeah, Lenny agreed, hopping down from the terminal with a practiced casualness that set her teeth on edge. "Let's get back to business." As Trix and Lenny returned to the bridge, Kessler was still racking his brain for solutions. The Aegis continued to hum ominously, the countdown a ticking metronome of doom. He was running out of ideas and, worse, running out of time. "Any luck with our sneaky friend?" Kessler asked as the two entered, their faces set with grim determination. "No dice," Trix replied, crossing her arms. "But Lenny here was chasing shadows in the cargo bay. Thought he saw someone." Kessler frowned, glancing at Lenny, who was suddenly very interested in the terminal screen. "And did you?" "Just your standard rust and regrets," Lenny said with a shrug. "Whoever it is, they are slippery." "Terrific," Kessler muttered. "Any progress with the countdown? Give me a sec." Lenny's fingers danced over the keys, his face a mask of concentration. The terminal beeped and whirred, a symphony of outdated tech playing its final act. Kessler watched, feeling the weight of potential catastrophe hanging overhead. If they couldn't stop this thing, not only was the Earth in danger, but they'd be responsible for unleashing a cosmic nightmare. The kind of legacy nobody wanted on their tombstone. As Lenny worked, Trix hovered nearby, her presence a reminder of the stakes. "You know," she said, breaking the tense silence, "if this thing blows, I'm going to haunt you both." "Get in line," Kessler replied, managing a wry smile despite the situation. "I'll probably beat you to it." "Got it," Lenny suddenly exclaimed, his voice cutting through the tension like a knife. "I've isolated the countdown sequence. Just need to input the override code. And you have that?" "Right?" Kessler asked, his voice hitching with hope and dread. Lenny paused, his silence more telling than any words. "Working on it," he finally said, the optimism in his voice strained by uncertainty. "Fantastic," Trix said, sarcasm dripping from her words. "We're saved by a miracle of procrastination." "Look, I've got a plan," Lenny insisted, though even he seemed unconvinced. "Just need to figure out the last few pieces." Kessler let out a breath, feeling like he was holding the weight of the universe on his shoulders. "Let's hope your plan works, or we'll all be just another footnote in history." As the seconds ticked away, Kessler couldn't shake the feeling that they were teetering on the edge of disaster. Somewhere on the ship, someone was plotting their betrayal and time was slipping through their fingers like sand. But one thing was for sure, they weren't going down without a fight. Not today, and definitely not because some backstabbing coward wanted a payday. "So, what's next?" Trix asked, her voice a touch more hopeful than before. "We keep working," Kessler replied, looking at his ragged crew with a weariness that matched theirs. "And when we find whoever's behind this, we make them regret ever crossing us." With that, they returned to their tasks, driven by the urgency of the countdown and the weight of the impending storm. They were spacers, survivors, and they weren't about to let a little thing like a planet killer ruin their day. Not if they had anything to say about it. Kessler ran a hand through his hair, which wasn't so much thinning as it was staging a tactical retreat. The rust bucket had seen better days. Hell, it had seen better decades. Yet here they were, perched on the edge of oblivion with a planet killer humming like it was just another Tuesday. "Still no progress on the override code?" he asked, not expecting miracles, but hoping for one anyway. Lenny grinned, the kind of grin that made Kessler itch for a strong drink. "Well, I did manage to change the font on the countdown display. Now it's a classy Times New Roman." "Great," Kessler muttered. "At least we'll all die in style." Trix, leaning against the wall, rolled her eyes. "Can we at least try not to die?" "I'm running out of sarcastic farewells." The ship's intercom crackled to life, spitting static like a cat with a hairball. "Captain Kessler," a voice boomed, echoing through the confines of the rust bucket. Kessler frowned. "This can't be good." The voice continued, dripping with a sort of majestic disdain only aliens could muster. "This is Commander Zolter of the Xarks Collective. You possess our sacred relic, the Aegis. We demand its immediate return." "Ah, the Xarks," Lenny said, as if they were discussing a particularly unpleasant weather pattern. "Haven't heard from them in a while." Kessler leaned closer to the intercom. "Commander Zolter, I assure you, it's not really yours to return per se. The thing's got a mind of its own." "Silence, inferior being," Zolter snapped, with the kind of overconfidence that usually preceded getting one's ass kicked. "You have 10 minutes to comply, or we will board your vessel and retrieve the Aegis by force." "Charming," Trix murmured, her fingers drumming on the wall. "Just when I thought today couldn't get worse." Kessler sighed, turning away from the intercom. "All right, any bright ideas, aside from throwing the Aegis at them and hoping it makes a nice paperweight?" Trix shrugged. "We could try diplomacy, you know, as a last resort." "Diplomacy's always the last resort," Kessler replied. "Right after begging and just before panicking." Lenny, fiddling with a multi-tool, glanced up. "There might be another way." "I heard a rumor about an ancient code buried deep in the scrapyard." "And you're just mentioning this now?" Trix asked, incredulous. Lenny shrugged, unfazed. "Didn't seem relevant until we had a bunch of angry space lizards breathing down our necks." Kessler pinched the bridge of his nose. "Of course it didn't. So we go on a treasure hunt while Zolter and his merry band of Xarks try to make us into galactic roadkill." "You got it, boss," Lenny said, not missing a beat. But hey, at least it's something. Kessler nodded, resigned to the madness. All right, Trix, you're with me. Lenny, you hold the fort. If that countdown hits 0 while we're gone, at least have the decency to look surprised. Wouldn't dream of it, Lenny replied, giving a mock salute. As Kessler and Trix made their way to the Rustbucket's exit, the ship shuddered, the hum of the Aegis a constant, ominous undertone. Kessler couldn't shake the feeling that they were racing against not just the countdown, but fate itself. The scrapyard awaited them, a labyrinth of twisted metal and forgotten dreams. It was a place where ships came to die, and if Kessler wasn't careful, it might be where they joined them. Any idea where to start? Trix asked, peering into the rust-ridden chaos. Not a clue, Kessler admitted. But at least the scenery is consistent. They picked their way through the debris, the air thick with the scent of oxidized metal. It was the kind of place that made optimism feel like a personal insult. You know, Trix said, kicking aside a piece of unidentifiable machinery, if we survive this, I'm taking a vacation. Somewhere with a view that doesn't remind me of my own mortality. Kessler chuckled. Let me know how that goes. I'll be the one hiding from unpaid bills. They moved deeper into the scrapyard, the shadows stretching like the memories of better times. The threat of the Sharks loomed large, but for now, their focus was singular. Find the code, stop the countdown, and live to complain about it. Any sign of our mysterious code? Trix asked, her voice slicing through the silence. Nothing yet. But if I were an ancient, all-powerful code, I'd probably hide somewhere dramatic, Kessler replied, casting his gaze across the wreckage. They trudged onward, the weight of urgency pushing them forward. Time was slipping away, each second a reminder of how precarious their situation was. And then, like a beacon in a sea of despair, they saw it. A terminal, half buried beneath a pile of scrap. It looked ancient, older than the Aegis itself, and for a moment Kessler dared to hope. There, Trix said, pointing. If there's a code, it's got to be on that thing. Kessler approached, his heart pounding with a mix of dread and determination. Let's find out. As they dug the terminal free, it flickered to life, screens casting an eerie glow over their faces. It was like staring into the eyes of a ghost, a reminder of a time when the universe was less complicated. Here goes nothing, Kessler muttered, fingers dancing over the controls. The terminal word, lines of code scrolling across the screen in a language lost to history. Trix watched, her impatience palpable. Tell me you've got something. Working on it, Kessler replied, brow furrowed in concentration. He could feel the pieces falling into place, a puzzle unlocking before his eyes. And then there it was, a string of symbols, an ancient code that might just save them all. Kessler copied it down, his mind racing with possibilities. Got it, he said, breathless. Now let's get the hell out of here. The scrapyard seemed to close in around them as they made their way back, the shadows stretching like the fingers of some malevolent deity. But they had what they needed, and for the first time Kessler felt a flicker of hope. Back on the rust bucket, Lenny was still glued to the terminal, the countdown ticking away like a bad joke. You find it? He asked as they burst in, breathless and triumphant. We did, Kessler replied, thrusting the code into Lenny's hands. Get this into the system. Now. Lenny didn't need to be told twice. His fingers flew over the keys and Kessler watched, heart hammering in his chest. This was it, the moment where everything could go either gloriously right or catastrophically wrong. The terminal beeped and the holographic display of the countdown froze. For a split second, time seemed to pause with it, the universe holding its breath. Then slowly the numbers began to climb, each one a small victory in the face of overwhelming odds. Kessler felt a weight lift from his shoulders, the kind of relief that tasted like victory. We did it, Trix said, disbelief lacing her voice. We actually did it. Lenny leaned back in his chair, a grin stretching across his face. Never doubted it for a second. Kessler laughed, the sound tinged with disbelief and exhaustion. Remind me never to play cards with you, Lenny. Your poker face is terrifying. The intercom crackled again, Zolter's voice a low growl. You have delayed the inevitable, humans. This is not over. Kessler approached the intercom, his voice steady. "Commander Zolter, I believe you'll find the Aegis is no longer your problem." Or yours. There was a pause, and Kessler could almost imagine Zolter's cold fury. "Then you leave us no choice. Prepare to be boarded." "Terrific," Trix muttered. "Just when I thought we'd caught a break." Kessler turned to his crew, determination in his gaze. "All right, ready the defenses. If the Zharks want a fight, we'll give them one to remember." Lenny nodded, already pulling up the ship's meager armament systems. "Let's hope they're not too attached to their boarding parties." As the rust bucket braced for impact, Kessler felt a strange sense of calm wash over him. They might be outnumbered and outgunned, but they were still here, still fighting. And if there was one thing he knew, it was that the crew of the rust bucket didn't go down easy. "All hands on deck," he called, the adrenaline sharp in his veins. "Let's show these Zharks what we're made of." As the ship shuddered with the sound of incoming fire, Kessler allowed himself a grim smile. They'd faced the impossible and come out the other side. Now, all they had to do was survive the day. And if they didn't, well, at least they'd go out with a bang and a damn good story. The scrapyard was a mess of twisted ambitions and forgotten dreams, but today it felt more like a damn haunted house. Every piece of mangled metal seemed to groan as Kessler and Trix trudged back toward the rust bucket. If there was a hell, it probably looked just like this, minus the comforting smell of sulfur. "Think the Zharks have ever taken a vacation?" Trix asked, her voice a mix of humor and desperation. "Somewhere with tiny umbrellas in their drinks," Kessler snorted. "Doubt it. Word is, they'd ruin a beach faster than you can say planet killer." They clambered over the debris, the ancient code secured in Kessler's pocket. It felt like they were carrying both salvation and damnation, and the weight wasn't getting any lighter. "Keep your eyes peeled," Kessler said. "This place is crawling with surprises, and I'm not in the mood for more." As if on cue, a shadow moved in the corner of his vision. Kessler spun, blaster drawn, but it was just an old holographic projector flickering to life, spitting out a ghostly image of a long-dead captain. The projection jerked and stuttered through its pre-recorded farewell speech, looking more like a drunken uncle at a last-minute wedding toast. "Charming," Trix muttered. "Even the ghosts here are past their prime." They continued, conscious of every creak and groan from the scrapyard. Kessler kept glancing over his shoulder, half expecting Zolter himself to pop out of the shadows with a "gotcha." The silence was shattered by the sound of distant gunfire, the unmistakable crackle of energy weapons. "That's not a good sign," Kessler said, quickening his pace. "Could be worse," Trix replied, jogging to keep up. "Could be the ship exploding." "Yet," Kessler corrected, because optimism had no place here. They rounded a corner to find Lenny sprinting toward them, face pale beneath the rust-colored grime. "Change of plans, Captain. We've got company." "Well, I'm thrilled to hear that," Kessler said, grabbing Lenny by the collar before he could dart past. "Who's shooting at us now?" "Rival salvagers," Lenny panted. "Seems like they caught wind of our little treasure hunt and decided to crash the party." Trix rolled her eyes. "Of course. Nothing like a bit of friendly competition to liven up a suicide mission." Kessler sighed, the weight of the universe nestled comfortably between his shoulders. "All right, here's the plan. We keep moving, get back to the rust bucket, get this code uploaded, and hope we're not vaporized before lunch." They moved with renewed urgency, dodging through the scrapyard's labyrinthine pathways like rats in a maze. The rusted hulks loomed around them, silent witnesses to their desperate flight. More energy blasts rained down, sizzling past with lethal intent. Kessler ducked behind a pile of scrap, motioning for the others to do the same. "Lenny, how close are they?" "Too close," Lenny replied, peering around the debris. "We've got maybe 5 minutes before they are on top of us." 5 minutes, Kessler echoed, the words a bitter reminder of the countdown ticking away in the rust bucket's control room. "Well, let's make them count." They pressed on, gunfire a constant menace behind them. Kessler could almost feel the Zharks breathing down his neck, ready to board the moment they made one misstep. It was like living inside a pressure cooker and someone had just turned up the heat. They reached the outer edge of the scrapyard, where the rust bucket sat hunched like an old hen on its last egg. Kessler spared a glance at the sky, half expecting a Jark's cruiser to drop out of orbit and blast them all to oblivion. "Home, sweet home," Trix quipped, though her voice was strained. "More like a fixer-upper," Lenny added, tone dry as a desert planet. Kessler grunted, fingers twitching as they neared the entrance. "Let's just pray it holds up for one more takeoff." The moment they were inside, Kessler slapped the control panel, sealing the hatch with a resounding clang. The rust bucket shuddered in protest, as if aware of the monumental task looming ahead. "All right," Kessler said, turning to his crew. "Lenny, get the code into the system. Trix, ready the weapons. We might not have much, but let's make them work for it." They sprang into action, each step punctuated by the ominous countdown echoing through the ship. Kessler could almost swear it was mocking him, every beep a reminder of how close they were to losing it all. Lenny hunched over the terminal, fingers flying over the keys. "This better work," he muttered. "I didn't sign up to be space dust," Trix snorted as she armed the ship's defenses. "No one did, Lenny. We're just here for the free snacks," Kessler paced, the weight of countless decisions pressing down on him. "Once that code's in, we'll have a choice to make. Give the Aegis back to the Jarks or use it." "Neither sounds like a happy ending," Lenny pointed out. "Who said anything about happy?" Kessler replied. "I'm shooting for not obliterated." The terminal beeped, signaling the code's successful upload. For a moment the countdown paused, hanging in the air like a suspended breath. "All right," Kessler said, voice steady despite the chaos. "Let's see what this thing can do." The Aegis pulsed with a sinister light, its runes glowing like the eyes of some ancient, vengeful god. It was awe-inspiring and terrifying, a reminder that they were meddling with forces far beyond their understanding. As the ship systems recalibrated, the Jarks hailed again. Zoltar's voice was a low growl, frustration evident. "Humans, you delay the inevitable. The Aegis is yours by right." Kessler approached the intercom, a wry smile on his lips. "Commander Zoltar, it seems the Aegis has other ideas." "Defiance will not save you," Zoltar snapped, but there was an edge of uncertainty in his voice. "We'll risk it," Kessler replied, cutting the transmission. He turned to his crew, determination etched in every line of his face. "All right, folks, time to show them what we're made of." The rust bucket roared to life, engines protesting as they powered up. Kessler strapped in, eyes fixed on the viewport. The enemy ships were closing in, their silhouettes dark against the swirling void. "Ready for a little action?" Trix asked, her hands steady on the controls. "Always," Kessler said, though his heart hammered in his chest. As the Jark ships bore down, the rust bucket shot forward, a rusty bullet in the depths of space. The Aegis hummed ominously, its power thrumming through the ship like an electric current. The Jarks returned fire, energy blasts lighting up the darkness with deadly precision. Kessler gripped his seat, adrenaline surging as the rust bucket danced through the chaos, a graceless ballet of survival. "Hold steady," he shouted, the command barely audible over the roar of battle. Lenny worked the systems, diverting power to the shields as best he could. "We're running on fumes, Captain." "Then let's make them count," Kessler replied, grim resolve in his voice. The Aegis flared, and Kessler felt a shiver run down his spine. Was it sentient, malevolent? He didn't know, and at this point he didn't care. All that mattered was surviving the next few minutes. Trix fired the ship's meager armaments, each shot a desperate attempt to keep the Jarks at bay. "Got one," she exclaimed, her voice a mix of triumph and disbelief. Kessler allowed himself a brief moment of satisfaction, but it was fleeting. They were still outnumbered, and the Jarks were relentless. The rust bucket shuddered as a glancing blow struck the shields, the impact rattling Kessler's teeth. "Status," he barked, eyes scanning the readouts. "Shields are holding," Lenny replied, though his voice was tight. "Barely," Kessler nodded, his mind racing. "Trix, swing us around. Let's give them a taste of this old girl's stubbornness." With a deft touch, Trix maneuvered the rust bucket, weaving through the Jark's formation. The Aegis pulsed again, an eerie light bathing the cockpit. "They're regrouping," Lenny warned, eyes darting over the sensors. Then let's split them up, Kessler replied, a plan forming in his mind. Use the scrap, make them chase us. Trix nodded, steering the ship into the scrapyard's chaotic heart. The old wrecks provided cover, their hulks a maze for the Zharks to navigate. The Zharks followed, their ships struggling to keep pace. Energy blasts lit up the debris-strewn corridors, fiery blossoms in the cold void. Kessler grinned, the thrill of the chase banishing his fatigue. Keep it up. We're not done yet. The rust bucket twisted and turned, a rusted phantom in the shadows. Kessler could almost hear the Zharks cursing them, their fury palpable even through the emptiness. Any more bright ideas, Captain? Trix asked, her tone teasing despite the tension. Always, Kessler replied, a glint of mischief in his eyes. Let's see how much they like surprises. As the rust bucket emerged from the scrapyard, Kessler activated the Aegis, its power pulsing through the ship. The Zharks hesitated, their formation wavering as they sensed the shift. Now, Lenny, Kessler shouted, heart pounding with anticipation. Lenny hit the controls and the Aegis blazed with light, a beacon of defiance against the encroaching darkness. The Zhark ships faltered, confused and wary. Kessler seized the moment, pushing the rust bucket to its limits. Let's give them something to remember us by. The rust bucket surged forward, a battered comet in the night. The Zharks scrambled to react, their ships veering off course. The Aegis's power surged, a wild, untamed force that demanded respect. Kessler could feel it, an echo of something ancient and powerful, a reminder that they were playing with fire. Easy does it, he murmured, guiding the ship with practiced hands. The battlefield fell away, the Zharks left in their wake. As the rust bucket sped into the void, Kessler took a deep breath, relief mingling with exhaustion. They'd survived for now. But the cost had been high and the end was far from certain. Trix, course for the nearest safe port, Kessler ordered, his voice steady despite the chaos. We need to regroup, see what we're up against. She nodded, setting a course that promised at least a temporary respite. So, Captain, she said, a wry smile on her lips. What's next? Kessler leaned back, the weight of the universe pressing down once more. Next we catch our breath, and then we figure out how to not die horribly. Lenny chuckled, the sound light in the darkness. Sounds like a plan, Captain. Kessler grinned, the thrill of survival coursing through him. They were battered, bruised, and vastly outgunned. But they were still here, still fighting. And if the Zharks thought they'd seen the last of the rust bucket and its ragtag crew, they were in for one hell of a surprise. Kessler leaned back in his seat, eyes scanning the chaos outside the viewport. His heart rate had settled into a slow, steady thud, much like the rust bucket's engines, which was not exactly a comforting thought. The ship creaked around him, metal protesting like an old man dragged out of bed too early. Well, Lenny said, breaking the tense silence, it's been fun. Let's never do it again. Not if I can help it, Kessler replied. The weight of his earlier decisions hung heavy on his shoulders. There were no easy choices, but there was something about staring death in the face that made a man reflect on his life choices. And his, in particular, seemed to be a string of questionable calls. So, Trix said, still glued to her station, are we going to talk about the glowing runes or just pretend we've got a spaceship disco going on? Kessler sighed, rubbing his temples. It's not a disco, Trix. That's our ticket to not being vaporized. They should put that on the brochure, Lenny chimed in. Come for the impending doom, stay for the light show. Kessler didn't have the patience to respond. His mind was spinning with the revelation that struck him like a rogue asteroid. The Aegis wasn't just a weapon, it was a puzzle, a riddle that echoed back through human history, and it was time to play archaeologist with all the finesse of sledgehammer diplomacy. Trix, get us a course, Kessler ordered, voice steady. We need to regroup and figure this out. You got it, Captain, she said, fingers dancing over her console. The rust bucket adjusted its heading with all the grace of a drunken buffalo, but it was movement. Movement meant hope, or at least the illusion of it. Lenny leaned over, voice low. You got a plan, boss. Working on it, Kessler replied, which was true in the loosest sense of the word. He glanced at the Aegis, glowing malevolently in its cradle like some ancient artifact begging to be pawned. Lenny, I need you to dig deep into Earth's ancient tech archives. See if anything matches the Aegis's patterns. You're thinking it's human-made? Lenny asked, skepticism laced in every syllable. Let's just say it's not outside the realm of possibility, Kessler replied. We've been underestimating our ancestors. They were crafty bastards when they needed to be. And here I thought they just sat around inventing fire and wheel, Trix muttered, setting the autopilot. Guess we owe them a little more credit, or blame, Kessler added, eyeing the glowing runes. Depending on how this pans out. As the rust bucket trudged through the void, Kessler's mind turned inward. If the Aegis was tied to human history, then maybe, just maybe, they had a chance to control it. A wild, desperate chance, but beggars couldn't be choosers when their doorstep was a vacuum. You remember those old myths about Atlantis? Kessler asked, glancing at Lenny. The Lost City, Lenny replied, his curiosity piqued. Yeah, why? Kessler hesitated, the weight of his theory pressing down on him. What if it's not a city, but technology, something that was meant to be lost? Now that's a bedtime story, Trix quipped. Aliens, ancient tech, lost civilizations, all the ingredients for a good conspiracy theory. Except this isn't a theory anymore, Kessler said firmly. It's our reality. And we're going to figure it out or die trying. You really know how to sell optimism, Lenny noted, though his fingers were already working at the terminal, searching for the tiniest clue in a galaxy of noise. Optimism is overrated, Kessler replied, watching the stars blur past. Survival, now that's more my speed. The rust bucket continued on its course, a stubborn speck in the vastness of space. Kessler knew they were on borrowed time. The Sharks would regroup, and when they did, they'd come down with all the fury of a toddler denied their favorite toy. Time to play hide and seek, Trix said, setting in the coordinates for the scrapyard. The plan was simple. Use the debris to their advantage, make the Sharks chase them through a maze of forgotten dreams. Lenny let out a low whistle. Well, if we're going to go out, we might as well make it memorable. That's the spirit, Kessler said. If they want the Aegis so badly, they're going to have to work for it. As the rust bucket approached the scrapyard, Kessler felt a grim resolve settle over him. This was their last stand, their final gamble. If they were going down, they were taking as many Sharks with them as possible. The scrapyard loomed, a chaotic graveyard of twisted metal and shattered dreams. It was a place where ships went to die, and it seemed fitting that it might be their final battleground. Kessler couldn't help but appreciate the irony. All right, team, Kessler said, steeling himself for what was to come. Let's see what we can scrounge up. As the rust bucket threaded its way through the debris field, the crew's banter was replaced by tense concentration. Every move had to count. Every decision could mean the difference between life and death. Trix maneuvered the ship with practiced skill, weaving through the wreckage with the precision of a surgeon performing emergency surgery. The Aegis pulsed in its cradle, an ever-present reminder of their predicament. Kessler's eyes flicked over the displays, noting the blips of Shark's ships lurking on the periphery. They'll be on us soon, he said, injecting a note of urgency into his voice. Lenny nodded, fingers still dancing over the terminal. I'm pulling up schematics on the Aegis. If there's anything in Earth's dusty old archives, I'll find it. The problem, Trix said, eyes fixed on the viewport, is that they probably didn't leave a handy instruction manual. Probably not, Kessler agreed. But we're humans, we improvise. The Shark ships began to close in, their intentions clear. Kessler could almost sense their gloating. They believed this was their moment of triumph. But he wasn't ready to concede defeat just yet. Trix, you see that big hunk of scrap on our left? Kessler asked, a plan coalescing in his mind. Yeah, ugly thing, isn't it? She replied. Ugly but useful, Kessler said. We're going to use it as a shield, lure them in, then hit them when they least expect it. Classic Kessler, Lenny said with a smirk. Turning trash into treasure. More like turning certain death into maybe not immediate death, Kessler quipped. But I'll take it. Trix nodded, adjusting their course slightly. The rust bucket slid behind the massive wreck, its engines humming in protest. The Zharks were closing in, but Kessler wasn't worried. Not yet, anyway. "Okay, Lenny," Kessler said, eyes fixed on the displays. "Give me something." "Anything?" Lenny frowned, eyes intent on his screen. "I've got a match," he announced suddenly, his voice tinged with surprise. "Old Earth legend, something about a weapon hidden for humanity's protection." "Timing's a bit off," Trix muttered. "Could have been nice to have this information before we were neck-deep in space pirates." "Better late than never," Kessler replied, hope flickering to life. "Lenny, what else?" "Something about harmonics resonance," Lenny said, scrolling rapidly. "The Aegis might respond to frequencies, something humans used to do with old tech." Kessler nodded, a plan forming. "Okay, let's use that to our advantage. If we can tweak our systems to match the Aegis's resonance, maybe we can disrupt it. Possibly even control it." "You're making this up as you go, aren't you?" Trix asked, glancing over. "More like educated improvisation," Kessler admitted. "But it's all we've got." The Zhark ship swung into view, their weapons primed and ready. Kessler felt a jolt of adrenaline, the thrill of impending combat sharpening his senses. There was no turning back now. "Lenny, start those frequency adjustments," Kessler ordered. "Trix, be ready to pounce. We'll make them regret ever crossing us." The rust bucket rumbled with anticipation as though eager to prove itself. Kessler's heart raced as the Zhark ships bore down on them, an ominous shadow growing ever larger. "Here they come," Lenny said, his voice a low whisper. And then, with a roar that reverberated through the void, the Zharks descended. Kessler barked orders, his crew responding with the precision of a well-oiled machine. Lenny adjusted their systems, the rust bucket's frequencies slowly aligning with the Aegis's mysterious hum. The Zharks unleashed their fury energy weapons blazing. The rust bucket shuddered under the onslaught, but it held. Barely. "Now, Trix," Kessler shouted, adrenaline surging. Trix engaged the engines, swinging the rust bucket out of hiding. The Aegis flared in response, its runes glowing with a fierce intensity. Kessler barely had time to register what was happening before the Aegis pulsed. A shockwave rippled through space, catching the Zhark's ships off guard. They faltered, their formation breaking apart in confusion. "Keep it up, Lenny," Kessler urged, feeling the tide begin to turn. Lenny gritted his teeth, adjusting with frantic speed. The Aegis pulsed again, its power washing over the battlefield. The Zharks scrambled, their ships trying to regroup. Kessler seized the opportunity, directing Trix to press the advantage. The rust bucket weaved through the chaos, its weapons adding to the assault. The Zharks were on the back foot, their confidence shattered. With each pulse of the Aegis, Kessler felt a surge of ancient power, a connection to something far older than himself. It was both exhilarating and terrifying, a reminder of their fragile existence in the face of such overwhelming forces. But for the first time, Kessler felt hope. Not the naive, fool's kind, but a gritty, defiant hope. They were outnumbered and outgunned, but they had something the Zharks didn't: resilience. The kind that had seen humanity through countless dark times. The Zharks were retreating now, their ships breaking off as they struggled to comprehend what had just happened. Kessler could almost hear their curses, their disbelief at being outmaneuvered by a ragtag crew and a rusty ship. "Looks like we gave them the slip," Trix said with a grin, her fingers deftly maneuvering the ship. "For now," Kessler replied, a smile tugging at his lips. "But we've bought ourselves some breathing room." "And a chance to regroup," Lenny added, leaning back with a sigh of relief. Kessler nodded, the weight of the universe feeling a little lighter. They'd survived another day, another skirmish in a long and brutal war. But they had something else now, a plan, a chance to turn the tables. As the rust bucket sailed through the debris-strewn expanse, Kessler allowed himself a moment of satisfaction. They'd faced the Zharks and lived to tell the tale, and as long as there was breath in his lungs, they'd keep fighting. "Next stop, Rust Bucket's Repair Bay," Kessler said, determination in his voice. "We've got a lot of work ahead of us." Trix chuckled, setting a course for the nearest safe port. "I hope they have good coffee." "We're gonna need it." Lenny shook his head, a wry smile playing on his lips. "And maybe a miracle or two." Kessler leaned back, the thrill of survival coursing through him. They were tattered, worn, and vastly outgunned. But they were still here, still fighting. And if the Zharks thought they'd seen the last of them, they were sorely mistaken. Humanity had a way of surprising even itself, and Kessler had every intention of proving that yet again. Kessler leaned back in his seat, the rust bucket's engines groaning like an arthritic hip in a marathon. The ship's exterior still smoldered, a not-so-subtle hint that they hadn't exactly left the Zharks with a fond farewell. "You know," Lenny piped up, fingers dancing over the terminal like he was playing a particularly spiteful game of Space Invaders, "I always thought we'd die in a blaze of glory, not in a dumpster fire." Kessler grinned, the kind of grin that came only from the gallows. "Don't worry, Lenny, we're not dead yet. Plenty of time for a glorious end." "Yeah, well, color me relieved," Lenny shot back, voice practically dripping with sarcasm. In the cramped confines of the ship's lab, the Aegis sat glowing malevolently. Its runes pulsed with an eerie light, like it was laughing at their misfortune. Kessler had seen enough horror movies to know that glowing ancient artifacts were never a good sign. Trix leaned over the nav console, her brow furrowed with the kind of concentration usually reserved for defusing bombs. "We've got the Zharks regrouping. Looks like we kicked the hornet's nest. More like a nest of homicidal space hornets," Kessler mused. "But we've still got the advantage of the scrapyard. Let's use it." Outside, the scrapyard stretched in every direction, a vast ocean of rusted dreams. Crumpled hulls and fractured technology floated aimlessly, the forgotten remnants of countless battles. "All right," Kessler said, channeling his inner motivational speaker. "We need to figure out how to disable the Aegis before it decides to blow us all to hell." Trix adjusted her seat, the creak of worn leather punctuating the silence. "We've found a few things in here. Could be useful." "Like what?" "A manual on how not to die," Lenny asked, eyebrows raised. "More like a blueprint for the weapon systems on these old wrecks," Trix replied. "We can rig something up, use their own tech against them." "Sounds like a plan," Kessler said, eyes glinting with a touch of madness. "But we need to do it fast." Lenny flicked through the terminal's screen. "I can work on linking the Aegis to these systems. It's like trying to plug a toaster into a nuclear reactor, but hey, I've had worse ideas. Like that time you tried to fix the life support with duct tape and wishful thinking," Trix quipped. "Hey, that worked," Lenny protested, raising a finger. "For a few minutes anyway." Kessler chuckled, but the gravity of their situation kept his humor dark. "All right, Trix, plot us a course through the scrapyard. Tight turns, narrow passages. Make it a nightmare for the Zharks to follow." Trix nodded, her fingers dancing over the controls. The rust bucket lurched forward, engine groaning like it had a serious hangover. The ship wove through the debris field, dodging hunks of twisted metal and ancient relics. "Time to play find the needle in the junkyard," Kessler muttered. "Lenny, how's that connection coming?" Lenny grimaced, hands a blur over the terminal. "It's like convincing a cat to take a bath, but I'm getting there." The Aegis pulsed again, the glow intensifying. Kessler's skin prickled, a sense of impending doom hanging over them like a guillotine. "Whatever you're doing, do it faster," Trix urged, her voice tight. "We've got company." On the view screen, Zhark's ships emerged from behind the wreckage, their forms sleek and ominous. Kessler felt a spike of fear, but fear was an old companion, and he wasn't about to let it get the best of him now. "Time for a little hide-and-seek," Kessler said, the thrill of the chase igniting his blood. Trix guided the rust bucket through the scrapyard with a grace that belied the ship's battered state. They darted between derelict vessels, the debris shielding them from the Zharks' relentless pursuit. "Got it," Lenny shouted, triumph in his voice. "I've linked the Aegis to the scrapyard's weapons systems." "Perfect," Kessler said, a wicked grin spreading across his face. "Let's give them a taste of their own medicine." The Aegis pulsed again, but this time it was different. Power surged through the rust bucket, a crackling energy that hummed through every system. Kessler felt it, the raw potential of the artifact coursing through his veins. "Let's light him up," he said, determination hardening his voice. Lenny activated the weapons systems, a barrage of energy erupting from the scrapyard itself. Ancient cannons, long dormant, roared to life, their blasts slamming into the Zhark's ships with devastating effect. The Zhark's formation broke, confusion rippling through their ranks. Kessler seized the opportunity, directing Trix to press the attack. The rust bucket spiraled through the chaos, its weapons adding to the onslaught. The Zharks were on the defensive, struggling to comprehend the full scope of the trap they'd walked into. "Looks like they didn't see that coming," Lenny remarked, his grin as wide as a solar flare. "Yeah, well, surprise is the best weapon," Kessler replied, adrenaline pumping. "Especially when you're outgunned." The Aegis continued to pulse, its power setting the battlefield ablaze. Kessler could feel it, a connection to the artifact that was both exhilarating and dangerous. It was as if the Aegis was alive, feeding off their desperation, their determination to survive. In the chaos, one Zhark ship broke away, heading straight for the rust bucket. Kessler's heart skipped, a single ship but one determined to make its mark. "Brace yourselves," he shouted, gripping the armrests of his seat. The Zhark ship closed in, its weapons primed for a final blow. But just as it reached the rust bucket, the Aegis flared with a blinding light, a pulse of energy tearing through the void. The Zhark ship disintegrated in a brilliant flash, particles scattering like dust in the solar wind. Kessler blinked, momentarily blinded by the spectacle. "Phew, saved by the glowing death orb," Lenny quipped, shaking his head. Kessler chuckled, relief washing over him. "Who would have thought, but we're not out of this yet." The remaining Zhark ships hesitated, their confidence shattered. It was a fleeting victory, but Kessler knew it was only a matter of time before they regrouped. "Time to disappear," Kessler said, voice firm. "Trix, get us out of here." With deft hands, Trix guided the rust bucket away from the battlefield, weaving through the scrapyard's protective embrace. The Zhark ships held back, their indecision buying them precious moments. As the rust bucket sailed into the relative safety of the scrapyard's outer reaches, Kessler allowed himself a moment of reflection. They'd survived against all odds and turned the tables on their pursuers. "What's our status?" he asked, glancing at the crew. "The Aegis is stable," Lenny reported, the terminal's glow casting shadows on his face. "For now, but it's a ticking time bomb." "And the Zharks?" Kessler pressed. Trix shook her head, the hint of a smile playing on her lips. "Licking their wounds for the moment, but they won't stay down for long." "Then we need to do something unexpected," Kessler said, his mind racing. "We need to convince them we're worth more alive than dead." "How?" Lenny asked, skepticism evident. "By giving them what they've never had," Kessler replied, eyes glinting with a dangerous idea. "A reason to fear us, but also a reason to work with us." The crew exchanged glances, understanding dawning in their eyes. It was a long shot, but it was their only shot. Kessler leaned forward, his gaze fixed on the viewscreen. "Let's show the Zharks that humans are more than they bargained for." With the rust bucket's engines humming, they set course for the heart of the scrapyard. It was a gamble, a desperate and reckless maneuver, but it was also their last best hope. The Zharks had underestimated them, but Kessler knew better than anyone that humanity's greatest strength was its capacity to adapt, to survive against all odds. And as long as there was breath in his lungs, they'd keep fighting. As the rust bucket plowed through the wreckage, Kessler felt a grim determination settle over him. The Zharks would learn to respect them, but more importantly, they'd learn to fear them. With a final pulse, the Aegis flared, casting its eerie glow over the scrapyard. It was a beacon, a warning, and a promise all in one. Kessler smirked, the thrill of battle still coursing through his veins. They'd faced the Zharks and lived to tell the tale, and as long as they were alive, they'd keep surprising the universe. "Next stop," Kessler said, voice filled with purpose. "Show them what humanity is made of." The rust bucket surged forward, its battered hull gleaming in the starlight. They were bruised, battered, and held together by little more than stubborn resolve. But they were still here, and that was all that mattered. The rust bucket's engines wheezed like an asthmatic running a marathon, and Kessler might have compared them to an old man on life support. But they had just done the impossible, survived a skirmish with the Zharks, and lived to tell the tale. The Aegis had settled into an ominous quiet, its pulsing glow now a dull throbbing reminder that, while they'd made it through the gauntlet, they still held a ticking power keg. Kessler slumped in his chair, a throaty chuckle escaping. "Well, we're not dead, yet think that's worth a half-hearted cheer. Yeah, hip hip freaking hooray," Lenny drawled from his post, fingers tapping a rhythm on the terminal's edge. "Let's not pop the champagne until we're sure it's not full of acid." Trix snorted at that, swiveling her chair around. "Probably flat and warm, knowing our luck. Flat, warm, and deadly." "Perfect for us," Kessler replied, shaking his head with a rueful smile. "But it's a start. We really pissed off the Jarks this time," Lenny observed, the gleam of the terminal making his face half ghost, half goblin. "But hey, at least they know we're not just pushovers. Right? Because nothing screams don't mess with us like a rusty bucket of bolts and an overgrown glowy paperweight," Trix said, still wrestling the nav console into submission. "So, what's the play now, Captain?" "Still debating between running away screaming and the old shoot first, die later strategy," Kessler said. "But I'm leaning towards a third option, make friends." "Make friends?" Lenny echoed, disbelief stark on his face. "With who, the Jarks?" "No, with the Galactic Peace Choir," Kessler shot back, voice dripping sarcasm. "Yes, the Jarks. They've seen what the Aegis can do. Maybe we can convince them we're stronger as allies, or just plain suckers," Trix added with a smirk. "But why not? We've survived worse gambles." Lenny rubbed his chin thoughtfully, the gesture at odds with his usually devil-may-care attitude. "And how do we convince them we're worth keeping around?" Kessler leaned back, staring at the battered ceiling. "By showing them we're unpredictable, that we're survivors. And that if they are smart, they'll want us on their side when we're not trying to blow them to bits. Yeah, nothing scares an alien race like the threat of a bad hair day," Lenny muttered, rolling his eyes. "Never underestimate the human capacity for chaos," Kessler said with a dark grin. "It's one of our best features." The rust bucket continued its lurching journey through the scrapyard, the wreckage slowly shifting from a battlefield to a sanctuary of sorts. They drifted past ancient relics and forgotten dreams. Now they're allies in this new game of cosmic chess. "All right," Kessler said, pushing off from his chair. "Let's figure out how to sell this crazy idea to the Jarks." Trix swiveled back to her console, her fingers a blur over the keys. "Guess it's time to write up a hell of a pitch. Join us or die probably won't cut it. How about join us or we figure out how to detonate this artifact and take everyone with us?" Lenny suggested, a wicked glint in his eye. "That's the spirit," Kessler said. "Though maybe with a tad more diplomacy." As Trix and Lenny got to work, the rust bucket settled into an uneasy peace. The constant hum of the engines, the soft clatter of fingers on keyboards, the occasional curse when a panel sparked unexpectedly. These were sounds of survival, sounds they'd grown familiar with. "The Aegis is stable, right?" Kessler asked, wandering over to where Lenny was tinkering. "As stable as a cat on a hot tin roof," Lenny replied. "But yeah, nothing's ticking faster than it should be." "Good, because I'd really like to avoid becoming stardust if it's all the same to everyone." "You still have that optimism problem," Lenny quipped. "Might want to get that checked out." Kessler shrugged. "In this line of work it's either be optimistic or be dead, or both if we're really dedicated." Trix peered over her shoulder, a ghost of a smile on her lips. "Speaking of dedication," Kessler said, leaning against the console, "do we even have a backup plan if the Jarks decide thanks but no thanks?" "Backup plan?" Lenny asked, voice dripping with disbelief. "When have we ever had one of those?" "Fair point," Kessler conceded. "But let's try not to make winging it our default setting forever. Pretty sure it's the only setting this crew knows," Trix added with a chuckle. They worked in tandem, the familiar rhythm of banter and planning a strange comfort in their oddball existence. Each keystroke, each strained mutter, was a step closer to whatever future awaited them. The Aegis remained silent, a watchful sentinel aware of the stakes laid out before it. "All right," Trix said, finally turning away from her work. "I've got the message. It's risky, but I think it's our best shot. Risky's just code for exciting, Lenny said with a lopsided grin. Or idiotic, Kessler countered, pushing off the console. But when did that ever stop us? The message was sent, a digital olive branch flung into the void. It was an offer of peace, or at least a ceasefire long enough for them to parley. Kessler turned his gaze to the view screen, watching as the scrapyard fell away, their ship running a cautious orbit around their makeshift sanctuary. Moment of truth, Kessler muttered, eyes locked on the stars. The response came quicker than expected, the Zhark's commander's visage flickering onto the screen. Commander Zolter looked as pleased as a cat dropped in a bath, his expression one of suspicion and grudging interest. "Human," Zolter began, voice like sandpaper on steel. "You propose an alliance." "More like a strategic partnership," Kessler replied, arms crossed. "We've got a piece of your history, and you've got ships that could level us without breaking a sweat." Zolter's eyes narrowed, the runes on his skin glowing faintly. "And why should we not simply take what is ours?" "Because we've demonstrated we can use it," Kessler said flatly. "And I doubt your superiors would take kindly to losing more ships trying to get it back." Zolter paused, the air between them thick with tension. The silence stretched, a taut wire begging to be snapped. Finally, Zolter spoke. "Very well, human, we will hear your terms." Kessler felt a grin tug at his lips, a sensation that was becoming all too familiar. "Let's talk then." As the conversation unfolded, Kessler felt the weight of the moment pressing down, suffocating in its intensity. But beneath the tension lay something else, a spark of hope, an ember of something more profound than mere survival. It was the idea that maybe, just maybe, they could walk away from this with more than just their lives. They could walk away with a story worth telling, with allies where there once were enemies. The deal was struck with a handshake that could have powered the rust bucket for a year with its sheer awkwardness. The Zhark ships retreated, a grudging respect implicit in their withdrawal. Kessler slumped back, letting out a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. "Well, I'd call that a win, or at least not a total disaster." "Yeah, but let's try not to do that again," Lenny suggested, cracking his knuckles. "My stress levels can only handle so much heroism." Trix laughed, the sound bright and unexpected. "Heroism, huh? Let's just call it not dying creatively and move on." The rust bucket shifted course, its engines purring with a newfound life. The scrapyard fell away behind them, a graveyard turned proving ground, a place of beginnings rather than ends. "So, what now?" Kessler asked, looking to his crew. "Now," Trix replied, a glint in her eyes, "we see what other trouble we can get into." Kessler nodded, the thrill of the chase igniting once more. "Sounds like a plan." And so they sailed off into the stars, a ragtag group of survivors turned diplomats. It wasn't the journey they'd expected, but it was theirs nonetheless. And for Kessler and his crew, that was enough. For now, anyway.